this section, we're talking about applications of quadratic equations. The goals, number one, to solve formulas for a specified unknown, and number two, to solve applications involving quadratic functions. In this first set of examples, we're going to solve each one for the specified variable. Assume that all variables are non-negative. In this first example, part A, we have v equals pi r squared h, and we're going to solve it for r. Now, this is an actual geometry formula. It gives the volume of a right circular cylinder. So imagine a Pepsi can. So that's a right circular cylinder. And when we talk about the radius, we're talking about the radius of one of the circular end caps. So that's r, that's h. And then the volume would be how much space that it takes up inside. So v equals pi r squared h. We're going to solve that for r. So it makes sense that r has to be positive, really. It's never even going to be 0, let alone negative. So, okay, what do we do here? Well, whenever you're solving a formula or any equation, I want you to keep the balance principle in mind. The balance principle says that what you do to one side of an equation, any operation you do to one side of an equation, you do to the other. And then in conjunction with that, keep in mind the reversibility principle. Any operation in math can be undone by doing the reverse or inverse operation. That's the reversibility principle. Okay, you might want to write pi r squared h on the left here because it contains that factor that you're going to solve for. And then let's talk about the technique we're going to use to solve this. Notice what you don't see. You don't see an r to the first power anywhere in this equation. All you see is r squared. When that happens, you're going to solve by taking roots. That's the easiest way usually. So let's solve this thing by taking roots. In order to solve by taking roots, we need to first isolate r squared. How do we isolate r squared? Well, you have to think about the operation that attaches it to the pi and the h. Both times the operation is multiplication. So how do you undo multiplication? How do you reverse multiplication? You divide. And so we're going to get r squared by itself first of all. We're working towards solving for r. By dividing both sides by pi, that undoes multiplication by pi, and h, that undoes multiplication by h when you divide by h. Balance principle says, hey, do it to both sides. And if we do that, we isolate the r squared. And we get r squared is equal to v divided by pi times h. Now, we don't want r squared, we want r. So what reverses squaring? Oh, square rooting. So if you want to undo squaring the r, take its square root. If you want to balance things out, do it to both sides. And then you get square root of r squared is just r. Don't worry about the plus or minus out in front because we're assuming all variables are non-negative. And we'll just leave it as the square root of v divided by pi times h on the right side. And that's your answer. So if you were given the volume of a right circular cylinder, but for some reason you want it, and you knew the height, for some reason you wanted r, you could get it using this formula.